Hello, and nice to see you again at the start of 2025. And I think what has the potential to be another crazy year again. Certainly unpredictable, if anything. I've just finished watching well, I'm sure along with many of you, the recent millennial streams. Well, I should say like at least some of them. I have to admit, I've only selectively watched certain streams, ones I'm particularly interested in, but I still think I've emerged from Millennial having taken away some new insights. So, although ultimately I feel like the overall kind of vector of interest, the trajectory of my insights are still fundamentally as they were prior to Millennial. But if anything, perhaps a bit more solidified and enriched. So, I'll go ahead now with some of the main takeaways that I got from it. Regarding certain streams that I particularly enjoyed, um, to no one's surprise, the Woodlander. Um, Also, a YouTuber called aarvoll, uh, which I've been aware of for a long time. Although his millennial stream I found particularly enlightening because of his more recent activities. That specifically concerning his Return to the Land project, um, which bears many similarities to the Woodlander initiative, although his project is based in the Ozarks in America, and obviously Woodlander is based in England, so there are obviously going to be some differences there. Um, I thought it was interesting and insightful to see how aarvoll's project utilizes certain legal precedents, such as the Private Members Association, and then this kind of overseas areas of land that have been kind of subdivided into LLCs, although don't quote me on that. But the PMA, as it were, essentially allows for kind of private control of whom can partake in land sharing. Um, it isn't as much subject to overarching bureaucracy. There's a bit more kind of flexibility there in regards to kind of ownership and collective participation. And obviously, a land sharing um, ownership initiative across the pond is going to provide a kind of interesting parallel to the Woodlander initiative. Um, I believe over here, Woodlander is using certain private members rules, though I'm not sure if it's structured in like exactly the same way as the Return to the Land project in America. But in any case, these two projects can learn from one another, and I think share valuable insights into how kind of selective community-based kind of land ownership can practically work. So yeah, I really enjoyed both Woodlander and aarvoll streams, and the fact that this kind of parallelism is kind of spreading organically. I think it's very reassuring. The idea of kind of alternative communities, parallel societies starting to bear fruit and come to fruition, at least to a certain extent, um, in the kind of very early sort of incubatory stages. But there's a lot of promise. Um, Aside from that, I've also enjoyed the AMAs from Woes, the inimitable host, of course. Um, Particularly, I enjoy the outro stream at the end because I feel like it tends to give you an insight into the kind of the overall tenor, the vibe of the whole festival, and therefore a kind of a potential vision of the future and where the alternative sphere is kind of widely going. Um, I feel like actually quite an interesting facet of this millennial is how it kind of feels very smooth and kind of coordinated and professionalized. Um, some of the graphics being outsourced, I think, and outside help in a limited capacity being used to kind of help bring everything together. I feel like kind of gave it a very polished feel, albeit perhaps a little bit at the expense of the more somewhat perhaps nostalgic kind of retro graphic that we saw last year with the memorable train title sequence. So maybe a bit less cozy, but still really good. Um, Feels more kind of institutionalized, I think. But I would say in a good way because it's potentially now more sustainable and kind of repeatable, replicable in the future. Also, I watched one of the banquet streams, the England one with Iconoclast and Horus. An interesting takeaway I got from that, I thought was quite important, was how Iconoclast and Horus both kind of said that even with their kind of, I think it was their YouTube accounts, um, being kind of recently released from censorship jail, they felt a bit lost as to what to use them for. Um, and I think this kind of feeds into a kind of wider lamentation within the kind of dissident sphere, a kind of withdrawing, sort of self-silification of important figures like like Woes himself. Although I'd like to emphasise with Woes and a lot of other figures, they were abrasively censored. Morgoth with his great Turning Away video, you might remember. He's less active on YouTube now, and just a kind of, I feel like a general feeling of malaise in the dissident sphere, kind of less connectedness, and millennial being the obvious exception to this, and to a limited capacity, I think Substack as well, in which kind of a lot of these kind of outsider figures have gathered. I think also of interest was when Iconoclast talked about how he was attracted to movie critic YouTube. So I think Critical Drinker, Mauler, and so on. I've also mentioned these figures in an earlier video I made about. I feel like there's a gap in YouTube for a more kind of alternative channel to make this type of content and provide a kind of deeper insight into mainstream culture. Something I want to do with this channel going forward, once I've sort of established the kind of archival foundations of what I'm doing. The broader idea of kind of culture being an open door into the mainstream, and potentially using that to garner a kind of wider interest and audience. Also of note, and this is kind of a separate thing, how Rumble has been more kind of active and to the fore recently. It seems to be galvanizing more interest widely as a more kind of significant competitor to YouTube, and certainly after the kind of the slowing down of Odyssey as what was the more promising alternative channel for dissident YouTubers, Rumble seems like it's becoming more of a thing. I think it's recently signed Dr. Disrespect, who now is, funnily enough, a kind of more outsider figure. But because of that and his popularity, that can potentially be utilised in a way to draw in sort of more sort of outsider figures into this particular niche and kind of garner a wider audience as well. And it's an opportunity to kind of maybe link movies culturally and gaming together, especially utilising alt media sites to do this. So there's an interesting thing. So yeah, all in all, an interesting millennial. I mean, they always are, but I think especially this one feels like it's kind of more formalized after a decade, even without the use of YouTube, which I think is very promising. It bodes well for the future. Twitter X, again, being an important platform. It's also obviously useful now. So this gives us more opportunities again for wider engagement. It just seems like culture, as opposed to ideology, seems to be the way forward, at least for me, when engaging in mainstream social media, and also a kind of way to avoid the more kind of, the nefarious, prolific kind of widespread censorship that we tend to see. I think so. That's good. And alternative apolitical movements such as Woodlanderinitiative and aarvoll's Return to the Land are starting to come into the fore now, which I think is really good. I think my main hope is that what was the dissident sphere can potentially reunificate at least to a certain extent, but not under a dissident banner kind of explicitly, but under a more alternative, kind of broader nexus, where there's more, at least I think, cultural flexibility and therefore engagement, I feel like. And there's the potential there to kind of lead to an outsider view that isn't as socially intimidating, I think, or triggering. And it's getting some of that old kind of swagger back that we had, several years ago, but perhaps without all the ideological baggage that comes along with it. So there's definitely that. And I think also a sense of fun, engaging with culture again. So, providing a form of entertainment for people, but from our unique perspective, as it were. And this and the alternative becoming more manifest IRL, with apolitical initiatives like Woodlander and Aarvoll. I think we have overall an exciting year ahead, and as you can see, there's plenty of opportunities for a kind of winning people over and garnering more interest, and hopefully winning people over to our perspective, and building communities both online and offline potentially. So again, just to reiterate, for me, very much looking forward to 2025. Let's make it our year, and we have the potential to make it our year for sure. So like, comment, subscribe, and thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.